Oh, good morning. It's October 2nd. It's a Conflux community call, and I am your rotating chairperson for today. I won't be rotating today. We rotate each week. And let's see. The notes I'll put in the chat in case somebody doesn't know where they are. Cool. So the first one was from Ralph, ADR review. I don't know if you want to say something about that, Ralph, but we spent the whole meeting yesterday looking at the GitOps ADR. It's complicated, but I think we made a lot of progress on it, and I hope we'll be able to merge it next week. I think we're headed there. Agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that. The one thing I would add is that if we follow our process, there were 4 in the set that were supposed to be decided on this week. Because we spent all our time on the GitOps one, we didn't get to them, so we scheduled an overflow meeting this afternoon. We're going to burn through those and hopefully get those dealt with so we can stay on track for our proposed cadence.
Cool. Yep. And then so next item is Adam Schnell.
All right. So last week we discussed the current mechanism for trusting tasks and why it is not going to work after the decentralization of build definitions. We agreed that we need an ADR for this, and well, I'm announcing that this ADR is now ready for review. We also discussed that we would need some changes to how we do task versioning. This ADR does not go into details on that yet. I decided to split it into 2 ADRs, and I'm working on the second one now. This first one just goes into how we get rid of the data acceptable bundles problem and what we replace it with. I'm primarily looking for reviews from the Conforma team or anyone else who's interested. That's about it.
Cool.
I'm just looking on the call. Attendees, a lot of people who work on Conforma are not here today, so let's go ping them on Slack afterwards and make sure they know about the existence of your proposal.
Next up is Ralph.
So I started working on this doc, which is a reboot of a set of docs I worked on in like March of this year earlier. Here, I'll put it in sidebar so everyone's got quick access. But the idea is, so when we've got Konflux, it can build, test, and release. It can do dependency management. We know how we have integrated it with and are replacing Red Hat systems at Red Hat. But Fedora is another story. It has a lot of similar systems to the way classic, let's say old school Red Hat systems work, but it's not exactly the same. There's a couple major differences, but a couple major similarities. And so the way that it's shaping up to look like Fedora is gonna consider adopting Konflux for their build, test, and release, but exactly how that fits in to their world is not clear, and it's really hard for people to provide constructive criticism if they don't know how it's going to fit into their world. So the whole point of the document is to try to just paint a picture at a very high and loosey-goosey level about how the flow of content through Fedora, how the workflows might work using Konflux as the kind of main engine for that activity. To give people something to bite their teeth into, right? To object to and say, well, I don't like this part, let's change it, or I like this part, and so on. So it's there, and if you have feedback on it, it would be very welcome. I think I really want feedback from the Fedora community, people who are not already really familiar with Konflux. But if you are familiar with Konflux and not Fedora, it's an opportunity to kind of learn about some of the ideas in Fedora's workflow. And your questions may help clarify things that won't be clear to the Fedora people when they look at it. Like if I just glossed over some concept or detail in Fedora, you might say, you should expand this more because it's not going to make sense to somebody who doesn't already know about whatever the point is. So please give it a read, give it a look. I'd appreciate it. That's it. If there's any questions on it now, I can take them. Otherwise, it's just an announcement and call for a review, please.
I mean, I haven't had time to read it, but I'll say I definitely fall into the class of people who understand Konflux and really don't know much about Fedora. But I'll ask, like, getting feedback from folks in the Fedora community who are not working with Red Hat systems, so who are not already going through this transition, would be really nice.
Yeah.
Right? If we could like get some perspective, because the Red Hat folks who are working on Fedora are just going to be like, oh, I'm already doing this in this other thing, so we should just do this, right? But like, I'm curious how like you would see something like Konflux interacting with like Copper, where there are like really independent self-service projects being onboarded and things like that.
Got it. That's a good question. There's an outstanding questions section at the bottom of the doc, Brian. I'm going to add that one. This is not mentioned at all. Louis?
Yeah, I have a couple. So what's the scope of using Konflux in Fedora? Is it for RPMs, container images, everything similar to the path that we take in Red Hat?
I think roughly yes, but it's also up for debate.
Okay.
Right now, it's being used actively to build the bootc, like Fedora image mode images, and Fedora CoreOS. But
Okay.
no RPMs and none of the other container images, like the Fedora base image, and there's like a collection of maybe 40 or 80 software collections, layered images on top of those. None of those are built by Konflux Fedora right now.
Okay. The other thing, I was just skimming through the document very quickly, and I don't see anything about which OCI registry is being used, and Konflux makes extensive use of an OCI registry during the build process and whatnot. Are they comfortable using Quay? Are they going to use something else? Might be interesting to explore.
Got you. I think we should write it as a note in the document so it's clear. For me, using Quay as a foregone conclusion there. The part of the value proposition of them adopting Konflux at all is that Red Hat engineering would be running it for them as a service. And so if they have to stand up and manage their own OCI registry, that erodes that part of the value proposition. I think it's got to be Quay, Quay.io / Fedora workloads or something.
Okay.
I didn't really think about framing it this way in the beginning, but the doc really focuses on the RPM workflow. The details about containers really aren't even mentioned because they're a little bit water under the bridge for bootc and CoreOS, who are already doing it. We could address the Fedora container workloads, but they're just kind of like an afterthought generally in the Fedora world. The vast majority of people are thinking about their RPM packages and how those get built, tested, and released and managed, and how they communicate about changes around them. I'll mention a thing that's not discussed in the doc at all, but a number of contributors have mentioned that Konflux doesn't solve a long-standing problem that they have in their RPM workflows today, which is chain builds. It's real similar to Renovate's space, but painting the picture for exactly how it would be solved for them would be helpful. The problem is anytime you rebuild one RPM, if you can find all the RPMs that have a build requires on that RPM and rebuild those two, then you get a better sense that the thing that you just rebuilt isn't going to break the rest of the world. And of course, there's cyclical dependencies in here. So it's a complicated problem to solve. So you're not just constantly churning around, rebuilding the build route. Some new thought has to be put into, can we address that gap in the community with Konflux? And if we can, then the value proposition goes way up, or it goes up some. How about that?
That sounds interesting, but it also sounds like a problem which can be solved independently of the build system. Like I could have some sort of chain rebuilding daemon that could work with any number of different build systems. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
at least
is it something that we should like think about having like an independent project on that we use with Konflux?
I think architecturally that's probably the way we should make it work. Maybe it's an add-on to MintMaker. Maybe it's a replacement for MintMaker in the Fedora RPM context. I'm not sure, but we should like at a high level, kind of beyond the technology, we need to be able to illustrate and describe how that would work to really, I think, to get people really interested.
Okay. We have a container health team at Red Hat that deals with problems like this. Do we want to like tell them to drop container from their name? Because if we don't, then I'm not like sure who to go, farm this out to.
Yeah. I'm not sure either. Tomasz?
I wanted to ask, you mentioned that you have some insight into the OpenSUSE build system and how they do chain builds a little bit. We discussed it on that Fedora Matrix channel. I wonder, do they automatically rebuild everything that has a build dependency, or is it more like per what is set per project in the open build system? I was just chatting with Gemini a little bit about it yesterday, and I don't get the full picture. But I'm not sure if they are like automatically rebuilding everything, because I'm not sure if it's like useful to rebuild everything.
So like, I think, I'm not sure either, so don't trust what I'd say. We should go verify independently. But I think what happens is that, yes, it rebuilds everything with some exceptions. And then the exceptions are the way that they like shut down the kind of auto rebuild forever and just wastefully rebuilding. So one way is, if as they're doing the rebuilds, if one package rebuilds and has the same digest as it did before, then they stop the chain there and they don't go any farther. They say it's a meaningless rebuild. Even though this thing requires that thing, when you rebuild it, nothing changes, so forget it. Another way is that a package, and I'm not sure which way it goes. It's either the package that would trigger it declares some sort of flag on it, and it's like build config. They call it the project config. Or the dependency does that says, I'm a supporting package. And if that's true, then they never propagate rebuilds down that kind of edge of the graph. And this layer, like strategically put these supports, flags, relationships around that kind of like truncates what would be the chain rebuild. And you can imagine if every single dependency in the whole graph was annotated with that, then nothing would ever get chain rebuilt, and they could just selectively remove a few. And there would be a couple, whatever the helpful ones are, but with 30,000 packages in Fedora, explicitly annotating those doesn't seem feasible or tractable.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
You're muted, Brian.
Oh, sorry. I was looking for Eric. He's not here though. He's the last person in the agenda. And I think if he's not here, we can bounce him to the next meeting. That'll be all right. So I guess floor is open for other agenda topics or any kind of conversation, discussion you guys want. If you want to keep talking about Fedora stuff, but we've reached the end of the agenda. Louis.
Yeah, just Andrew, Julian, and others, we were discussing things in channel yesterday, and I can't find the thread anymore. But it was the idea of providing a pipeline that goes through some testing, and folks can use it for with a floating reference instead of pinning to a particular digest of pipeline definition. So the idea would be that you could simplify the workflow for picking up updates on Konflux tasks, because you would just follow this tag or whatever floating mechanism to this pipeline reference, and then something behind the scenes, will just keep that thing up to date. There's pros and cons. The pros, obviously, is that you don't have to manage updates in your repo. If you have a lot of Git repos and a lot of components, that can be exhausting. not exhaustive. But the downside is that if there's an update that breaks you, you're just gonna pick that up and not have a chance to, gate that out. We were discussing some ideas on how to reduce the risk of that with, some kind of a template component of some sort on that pipeline definition repo, where it always gets built with to verify that the pipeline is still in working order. There's additional testing we could do to do that. You could potentially save a lot of cycles on the infrastructure, as not every component will have to run a build on every update that Konflux pushes out. But obviously, there's risks. There's ways to reduce the risk, but you can't for sure guarantee that a change to the pipeline definition won't break some user. And Julian has his hand up. They're doing something similar in Ansible. So maybe, Julian, if you want to talk more about that.
Yeah, sure. So let me share my screen. So it's going to be easier to explain. So we built this pattern before the migration tool was a thing. And our main purpose was to avoid updating 240 Tekton pipelines by hand every time that there was a breaking change. So our solution is that on this AP Konflux pipelines repo, we store the pipelines. Some of them are mostly the same thing that we have on the build definitions, where we are only changing the default values. Like we go with our hermetic equals true everywhere and so on. So everyone is building with something that is compliant to go to to the registry with advisories. And to get this, what we made is that for each of the different pipelines, we have a smoke test component where we do like a standard testing of that component. These are the small container files that can be, some of them are prefetching something. So we ensure that her meta task is not broken and so on. However, Lee, from what you were talking about, this gives us like a super good canary, but we don't lose the ability to gate this later on each of the components. Like this repo, it's getting the Tekton updates at any time. We change the min maker schedule here. So as soon as you are publishing new tasks, we are going to get those tasks on this cycle. And we will publish that bundle. However, the final applications, the components, are not using that bundle every day. Like we are delaying how we roll out that to the components using the renovate configuration. But when you release to a given component, here the bundle it's again pinned. So you are going to get a gating mechanism again, because you are going to get a proposal updating that SHA that you have here. So we play both sides somehow. On one hand, we centralize maintaining the pipelines. Now this is less useful, but it continues being useful. But it was super useful before the migration tool, because we had to manage all the YAML files manually. And we do some standard common testing on that repo. But after that, whenever this goes to the final customers, to the components, we are getting that update again. And there we have a social agreement internally between the different Ansible teams, where if for whatever reason an update to this SHA is failing, they are going to come to the owners of the pipeline, so we can either fix our pipeline on our own or elevate this to Konflux, whoever owns the application, the task that it's failing. It's not perfect because you cannot have like all the possible variations on this part where we are testing everything. And one of the big trade-off is that you need to expose almost anything on the pipelines as pipelines parameters. And right now, the customers, let's say they want to change the parameter on build a task. We are not exposed to on pipeline level, but they have access to the YAML file. They can go to the file and modify that parameter without any issues. When you go on this approach, you need to expose all parameters that you want to allow them to tweak of the pipeline level from the task level. And that's what a lot for like I'm thinking about giving this to any engineering things where we are mostly building the same thing using the same parameters. But to do this on a bigger basis, it can be a lot.
Ralph?
I'll comment and say I have seen this pattern in I think more than one team adopting this kind. The ones I had seen, Julian, had a centralized repo of pipelines like you did. Their individual components had a pipeline bundle reference to. They actually had a Git reference.
Yeah, most of the people is using the G2.
Yeah.
Actually, the dog is barking. We have to move to the bundle because we are using private repos, and when you cross different GitHub organizations, it's super difficult to share those private repos because the access token that you get from the GitHub application, the pipelines as code one, it cannot cross easily from one organization to the other. So we were using the GitHub solver, and then later we moved to the bundle.
I see.
That you have the same issue there with the GitHub solver. If anyone wants to modify a parameter that you don't have on the pipeline level, that they cannot tweak on the pipeline run itself, then first of all, you need to expose that and bring it from the task level to the pipeline level. And if you count everything that we have on the multi-arc build, like we have a handful of pipeline level parameters, but all the tasks that we are using, they have a huge amount of parameters that someone might want to tweak. And that will be a huge amount of parameters to allow them to tweak everything.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to add on the end just that this other variant of the same pattern I've seen, they're using Git references, like when you talked about the difference. They use a floating reference, a branch reference from their individual components to their centralized pipeline so that they gate on changes coming from Konflux build definitions to their centralized repo of theirs. And they'll do some canary check, I think like you do. But when it lands on main, all of their components pick it up on their next build, kind of whenever that is, which carries additional risk, right? You know, because they can't verify that everything's going to work. But I think they have fewer components than you do, so maybe it's for them the simplicity is worth the risk. But in your case, you want to be able to manage the change. With
we had that pattern using the floating tag at some point, and there were like a couple of issues. The first one was that you lose the ability to gate that update on the component level.
Mm-hmm.
If there is something that you didn't catch on the centralized repo where you have the pipelines that you are following latest of the main branch, suddenly when you try to build, your pipeline is broken and now you need to react over that. The other part where we have issues was with components that they don't update too much. If you are following a float in tech, at some point you are going to reach to the point where your build is using tasks from 5 months ago. And if you try to release that, then you cannot release that because you are going to have a violation. And like, we try to go on that direction first of all and make it simple. That we have to be super reactive because you need super good smoke test and gating mechanisms on the central repo if you are following a branch without any pinning. However, MidMaker can pin it using the Git tags too. So you could use the Git resolver, but don't follow the main branch and follow a SHA or something like that. And Andrew raised his hand like 3 hours ago.
Yeah, sorry, Andrew.
It's okay, Julian. I'm used to my hand getting tired. I think that this also, I don't know what the plan has been for the pipelines that we maintain as we work on decentralization, but this is also potentially beneficial for that because it separates that pipeline to be its own concern. You can define the pipeline on its own. That pipeline can be a sample component in a way that is updated by MintMaker, or you can even have, I was proposing using a cron integration test scenario to check for new tasks and trigger an update. So you can even update it outside those MintMaker schedules, since currently we are by default, we only run the Tecton updates once a week. But because this is a centralized reference, I think that if we were to do it, we also need to make sure that we have an extensible validation process so that if there are cases that we've seen where maybe there's a common use case that we hadn't considered, we can introduce that use case, that common use case, as a test case somehow to make sure it works, which, yeah, I'm not sure what the best way for that would be. Probably depends if you're doing a build versus a test update. But it's just something to think about. So far, we've been saying that we don't really support the pipeline reference, taking the pipeline as a whole. So this definitely be a change mindset, and it's likely to increase the number of problems, just because people don't make as many changes. Maybe we don't expose the right parameters to pipelines. So I think it makes sense. We just have to do it carefully.
Yeah, and there are part of the documentation that we will need to update. For example, the one about the timeouts is talking about go to your task and add the timeout on the task itself. And actually, you can tweak the timeout on the same way that we do with the compute resources, the limits on the request, on the pipeline run level, overriding it. So we will need to modify that kind of documentation to go on this and try to use all the overriding opportunities that we have from the pipeline run level, instead of saying to the user, hey, go to the pipeline and modify the pipeline itself.
In all the cases where this arrangement like lives in production, like in yours, Juliet, and in others, people have done work, like lots of work, to organize their repos that way. I wonder, how close can we get to this with an automated onboarding experience? If when you create your component, if you set a field in the spec that says, I want my pipeline by reference, or I want it exploded by value. And exploded by value is what we do today.
That's a great point, because on our case, we had to stop the automated onboarding.
First, yeah.
And we do the onboarding on our own, and we push that with our automations, because otherwise the first thing that we were doing was removing the full pipeline spec and changing it to a G2R solver. And this is something.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and this is something that I suggest to Andrew back on the days. It would be great if it's my audio.
I think that
Like, so the onboarding pipeline is coming from a config map that it's cluster wide, right? Like the controller will check the config map and we will get that pipeline run. It would be great on a pattern like this one if each of the tenants can define their own config map, where you are saying, hey, on my tenant, provide me these pipelines, and this is going to be the pipeline run that they're going to template to them. And we could use OCI artifacts to provide that too. I find the Euretics where we discussed this like a year ago.
Yeah, we have the UI still in place where you used to be able to choose, like, you wanted the simple pipeline, which was like built in, you just didn't see it at all, versus you wanted like the full pipeline sent to your repo, which doesn't really do anything anymore except tell you how to install the GitHub app and let you retry if it fails. But I could imagine that screen having like a radio button on it so that you could choose which thing you wanted sent to your pipeline or sent to your repo. And that would be like an easy way to expose it to folks. And behind the scenes, it would probably be like the annotation you guys are talking about.
Yeah, and Brian, to lean into that, I'd been talking with some folks from Tecton as well. How it would be cool to have a resolver that Louis dubbed as a customized resolver, that you can take in this pipeline reference and then slot in additional tasks, so that you can have that simple, the quote unquote simple interface where you don't have all the YAML for the entire pipeline that we recommend by default. But then you can just have a pipeline reference for that and then add in any additional tasks you might want.
I don't know how that would work, but maybe somebody can figure it out.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to open like a GitHub feature for what we're talking about? A GitHub issue in the community repo so we can track it.
Julian, you said you were going to look to see if you could find a feature request for this in the past.
Just for the config map side, not for the Tecton bundle. Right, the Tecton bundle on the pipeline, we solved that on our own. There was not need a feature. Well, the Tecton pipeline. As soon as we had got the Tecton pipeline, like the Tecton builder, bundle builder pipeline on Konflux, we didn't need any other features to make this happen.
All right, if there's no other discussion on that topic, Eric has joined us and we can go back to his topic.
Sorry for being late.
Yeah, no worries.
Commuting. But this is really mostly just a read-only. So Ralph has enabled the wiki page on the community repo a while ago, but it was just invisible to anyone without a content. And so since he fixed my permissions, I added an article, you can click on the link, on how to participate in GSoC and some template for potential GSoC ideas. So for Outreachy, well, if you remember a while ago, I re-raised this topic again of participating in student programs. So I think the Outreachy, the winter term for Outreachy is that ship has sailed this year. but GSoC will be again open in January next year. So there is a template. If you have an idea of something that you would like to see in Konflux, but there is just no business justification to prioritize it, consider making a GSoC project that you can mentor, add it to the template, or just clone the template and create an entry for project idea. So that would be great. Thank you.
Right. Any other topics or discussion anyone would like to bring up today?
It's not necessarily a topic for discussion, but for the GSoC ideas, there's all kinds of little things I'd love to do in the build tasks that I think would make good, like digestible GSoC projects. Reproducible builds, something somebody could do as like a science project, take a couple of examples and see if you can get the build a task to really produce the same bitwise binary each time. Another is ZSTD chunked compression. We do gzip compression everywhere, and ZSTD chunked is superior for pull times. So they do experiment making a param of that and then plumbing through the rest of our systems to figure out where things break. It'd be super cool.
Fair enough to dump the ideas to the template or just
Yeah.
modify?
I'll do it.
Thank you very much. We just also need, volunteers for mentoring our projects. I'm not sure if you're kind of a busy person, Ralph, so I'm not sure if you can mentor all of them.
Well, we'll see. It's a long time from now, so we can recalculate.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with this program. What's the scope of submissions? Like some of the stuff that Ralph mentioned seems to be kind of like big things to do. Is this the level of ideas they're looking for? Are they looking for something that's smaller? I just don't have experience with it, so I don't know what to expect.
So the baseline is that I think it's 13 weeks now, or is it the extended period? I lost that detail. Should be in the wiki or in one of the links that you can find on the wiki article, which redirects you to the guidelines for GSoC. But I think the baseline is 13 weeks. So you should think of something that can be accomplished within those 13 weeks or 8. I'm not sure which one it is because like there is the baseline is 13 weeks, but you can have ideas which can be accomplished sooner. So that would be a smaller chunk project. And then in some situation, you can even ask for an exception to extend the 13-week period, but you have to explicitly ask for it. For the baseline and the shorter timeline, you don't really have to. You just list it in your project submissions on what is the expectation. Along with the project ideas, you also should list the expected skill level. So whether it's a beginner task or an intermediate or advanced task. And obviously most students will apply for the beginner stuff because, hey, it's easy, I can accomplish it. But yeah, that's something we can figure out later. You always have to manage whether people are more skilled or not and offer an alternative project. So you should really try to scope the work that needs to be done within and squeeze it into those 13 weeks, and also assign some kind of skill level that is required to complete the task successfully.
Thank you.
Can I add a little bit to that? That I think like a thing that would be out of scope would be thinking about deployments, obviously, to Red Hat clusters as any sort of a acceptance criteria or anything like that. It's a purely upstream thing. Can you improve this upstream project and demonstrate that you've done it in whatever way is in the scope? I think too, and I'm not sure if this is in the guidance, but I remember talking about way back before that you want something that's meaningful. That's not just like a busy work task, but like it's going to have some value if the person contributes to it, because you want to essentially get a new generation hooked into contributing to open source and like get that feel. And if you contribute something and you can tell it has impact, that's going to like, after you leave Google Summer of Code or Outreachy, like take you not necessarily to the same community, but to other communities to like have that kind of participatory engagement. So it needs to be meaningful enough, but then there's this other flip side to that, which is it can't be so critical that if the person fails, it's like a big deal. Like it needs to be like an optional project in a way, so that like, because it's a grab bag who you're going to get out of the program, and you don't want, you know, undue stress to fall on this person if like they're like falling behind on whatever the project is. So it's about developing the person first and foremost.
Okay. So like no more hands on this topic. And that's the last topic. So again, open floor, or we can end the call. Going once, going twice. All right, guys. It seems like we're done here. Thanks everyone for coming. We'll see you next time.